how can one guy be a nation's most feared criminal and at the same time, a community's most beloved protector? It sounds impossible, right? Well, today we're gonna try and unravel the huge paradox that is Christopher Dudus Coke. Okay, so I want you to picture this. It's 2010, we're in Kingston, Jamaica, and a city, it's basically a war zone. The streets are just desolate. The government's even declared a state of emergency. And all this chaos, it's all because they're hunting for one single man. And after 3 full days of just brutal street battles, this was the official count. 73 people dead, all to catch one guy. Let that sink in. So you gotta ask, right? Who was this man, Christopher Dudus Coke? And maybe even more importantly, how on earth does a gangster from a pretty small island become such a big deal that the United States government would risk pushing an entire country into what looked like a civil war just to get their hands on him? All right, let's dive in. First, let's look at the guy the US government saw, the brutal, absolutely vicious criminal. I mean, just listen to that. This is a level of brutality that's just off the charts. We're not talking about your average criminal here. Witnesses claim they saw him using a chainsaw on people. Seriously. This wasn't just about making money, it was about building a reputation based on pure, absolute terror. And here's why he was such a big international target. The official US indictment, it lays out this massive criminal operation. We're talking tons of marijuana and cocaine pouring into places like New York and Miami. And in return, a steady flow of weapons going right back to Jamaica. For 20 years, he was the guy in charge, the undisputed Don of Jamaica's most feared gang. And that gang, ma'am, they had a name that tells you everything you need to know about them: the Shower Posse. So why Shower Posse? Well, it's pretty chillingly simple. Their whole tactic was to not just take out their rivals, but to literally shower them with bullets. We're talking overwhelming firepower. It wasn't just about winning a fight, it was about making sure no one would ever dare to fight you again. And this is how they held onto their power. They took their neighborhood, a poor community called Tivoli Gardens, and basically turned it into their own personal fortress, a no-police zone. Cops wouldn't go in there. Why? Because inside those walls, Dudus Coke was the law. Simple as that. But, and this is where the whole story just flips on its head, because inside that same no-police zone, the people living there, they didn't see him as a gangster. No way. To the residents of Tivoli Gardens, he had another name: the President. And here it is. This is the central paradox of the whole thing. How can you be a drug lord, but also a community activist? A weapons trafficker, who's also the guy you go to settle a dispute? It's wild. To the rest of the world, he was the Don. But at home, to his people, he was the President. So you might be asking, why were people so loyal to him? It's simple, really. He gave them what the government couldn't or wouldn't. If you needed a job, you went to Dudus. If your kid needed money for school fees, you went to Dudus. He was the one providing food, helping with medical care, and he delivered local justice. In his territory, there was zero tolerance for stuff like theft or rape, because everyone knew Dudus himself would be the one to deal with you. You know, one person in our sources summed it up perfectly. They called him a benevolent despot. And that's exactly what he was. Despot because he ruled with absolute and often really brutal power. But benevolent because he also made sure the people under his rule were taken care of. He was their king, their provider, and their protector, all rolled into one. Now, a guy with this much power in his own community, that doesn't just stay local. Oh no, it scaled up and it created this huge political mess that went all the way to the top, affecting the governments of both Jamaica and the United States. Just look at how this all played out. First, Dudus is so powerful he's basically a kingmaker, helping a guy named Bruce Golding become prime minister. Step 2, the US government officially asks for Coke to be extradited. Now the prime minister is in a terrible spot, right? For 9 long months, he actually resists the US demand. But eventually, the pressure is just too much. He caves. And that's the moment the fuse is lit. And that brings us to the final chapter of this story. The manhunt, that bloody siege, and, well, a really strange ending. So remember that massive siege, the one where 73 people died? Well, after all that, their target, Dudus Coke, was gone. Just vanished. He was on the run for a whole month. And then he gets caught at a simple vehicle checkpoint. And get this, the most feared man in Jamaica, the guy they just fought a mini war over, he wasn't carrying a weapon. He was disguised as a woman, wig and all. You can't make this stuff up. It's an almost comical end to such a terrifying story. After his capture, things moved really fast. He's extradited to the US. In a Manhattan courtroom, he pleads not guilty. And you know what? People back in Tivoli Gardens were actually celebrating. But the prosecutors had a trump card, hours and hours of wiretap evidence. Once Dudus heard those recordings, he knew it was over. The case was a slam dunk. So he changed his plea to guilty and got sentenced to 23 years in a federal prison. And that brings us right back to where we started, to that central question. Was Christopher Dudus Koch just a brutal criminal who used his charity as a way to build a human shield around himself? Or was he something else? A product of a government that failed its people? A so-called benevolent despot who stepped into a power vacuum to protect his community using the only tools he had? There's no easy answer here, and the truth, just like the man himself, is incredibly complex.